Hi, sixth graders. We are still in Unit 3B. This time our page should be titled Percents and Decimals. Learning target is being able to convert between percents and decimals. All right, so if we think about percents and what they represent, I know that percent is out of 100. And if we think about our number system and what the numbers to the right of a decimal represent, we have tenths, hundredths, and so forth. Okay, there's a few different ways that we can convert between a percent and a decimal. So if we have 7%, I know that 7%, again, like we just said, is out of 100. So 7% would just be 7 out of 100. I drop the percent and write the number out of 100. And then, as we know, when we've learned about decimals, 7/100ths is just written as 7/100ths. This is in my hundredth spot, so 0.07. If I look at the number 7, so 7%, if I just drop my percent and I look at 7, I know that if I divide by, we know that if we multiply by 10, we just add a 0 and it's going to be 70. If we multiply by 100, we add 2 zeros and it's 700. If I multiply by 1,000, I add 3 zeros, because the number of zeros that you multiply by after the 1 is how many zeros you add on to your answer. So it's the opposite when you divide. So 7 divided by 10 is going to be, I take my 7, and if we look back up here, if I basically have 7.0, and I can see that I'm just moving my decimal to the right one, or here, I'm moving my decimal to the right 2, depending on if I'm multiplying by 10 or 100. So if I divide by 10, I'm doing the opposite, 7.0, and if I divide by 10, I'm just moving my decimal to the left 1, because there's 1 0. If I divide by 100, I'm going to take 7.0, and there's 2 zeros, so I'm going to move my decimal to the left 2, and then I have to add in some zeros. So then this 0 goes away, and it would be 0.07. And because a percent is out of 100, that means that it's always going to be moving the decimal of the number 2 places to the left. So this is one of the most important things that you will learn with converting percents to decimals. Okay, when you're going from a percent to a decimal, move the decimal of the number 2 places to the left. You try these 3, pause me, and then come back and check. So 8% is 8 out of 100, which is 0.08. 54%, I know that if I just move my decimal 2 to the left, it starts here, because if I don't have a decimal, then it's just an invisible one right after the number. 1, 2, and then I have to add my 0 before, so 0.54. Here, this one already in 84.2%, there's already a decimal in the percent, which just because there's a decimal in the percent doesn't mean that I'm still not going to move my percent. 84.2% just means that it is in between 84% and 85%. So it doesn't make it 84.2 as my decimal. I still need to take my decimal and move it to the left 2, add a 0, so then it's going to be 0.842. And I leave all the numbers that come with the percent. Alaska is the largest state, making up about 16 1/10% of the land area of the United States. Write this amount as a decimal. So the first thing that I need to do is take 16 1/10%. I'm going to keep it as a percent, but I'm going to rewrite this fraction as a decimal within my percent. So 16 1/10 we know is the same as 16.1%. Now if I want to write it as a decimal, remember we just take our decimal, move it to the left 2, have to add a 0. So 0.161 is the same as 16 1/10%. About 6 4/5% of the total area of the U.S. is water. What decimal represents this amount? You try these two on your own. Come back and check. So 6 4/5% is the same as 6. So I can do 5 times 20 to get 100. 4 times 20 then to get 80. So it's the same as 6 80/100ths, which is 6.08. Oops. Or no, 6.80, which would just be the same as 6.8. Still a percent, because 6 4/5 is the same as 6.8, which is 6.8%. Then I move my decimal to the left. There's not a spot in here, or there's not a number in here, so I have to add a 0 and then a 0 before. So it'll be 0.068. The total area of Australia is 38 11/20. So let's get a new color. 38 11/20%. Again, I know that I can do 20 times 5 to get 100. 11 times 5. So we'd have 38 55/100%, which is 38.55%, because then I just drop my 100, do my 0.55, move my decimal to the left 2, so I have 0.3855, which is that written as a decimal. And then if we want to convert decimals to percents, I have 0.4 or 4/10 as a percent. So we're going to write the decimal as a fraction. 4/10. We know percents, remember, are out of 100, so we have to convert it to hundredths. So times 10 times 10, so we have 40 hundredths. And then I know I can just drop my 100, and it would be 40%. I also know that if I multiply, remember, if I multiply by 10, I add a 0. If I divide by 10, or if I multiply by 100, I add 2 zeros. So really what I'm doing is 0.4, and then we would need to multiply times 100, but instead of adding a 0, this is just telling me that I have to move my decimal 2 spots. So what's going to happen is 0.4, move it 2 spots to the right, which is going to include going to the right of my 4 and then another spot. And then I have to add a 0 here, which is going to be 40, and then add my percent. I don't have to add any more zeros after here, because once we have a whole number with a decimal after it, then all the zeros after the decimal are just dropped. So let's do another one together. 0.5, what we do is we move the decimal 2 to the right. If there's an open spot, like there is right here, then I have to add a 0. So 0.5 is the same as 50%. Do the next two on your own and then check. So if I wrote 0.34 as a fraction, I would have 34 hundredths, which is the same as 34%. Here I have 9 hundredths, which is the same as 9%. Or I could take my decimal and go 1, 2, and I would end right after the 9, which would also be 9%. Each day, Rico and his dog walk 0.625 miles. What percent of a mile do they walk? So decimal to percent is, I thought it was written on here, but decimal to percent. Move the decimal to the right 2 places. I would say that would be the second most important, or maybe tied for the most important thing to write down on this video. The other one for percents to decimals, moving it to the left, this one moving to the right. So 0.625, let's rewrite it. Move my decimal 2 to the right, 1, 2, which is going to be 62.5% of a mile. And I see 0.625. 0.6 is a little bit more than 0.5. We know that 0.5 is half, which would be 50%. So it makes sense that 0.625 is a little bit more than 50%, which is 62.5%. Okay, just another notes if you didn't get it down, second chance to get it down. Percent to decimal, 2 decimal places to the left, so 45%. Here's my invisible decimal, 1, 2, 0.45. Here's my invisible decimal for 4%, 1, 2, add a 0, 0.04. Decimal to percent, 2 decimal places to the right. And then we go, start here, 1, 2, so 32%. Start here, 1, 2, add a 0, 80%. Start here, 1, 2, 12.3%. All right, because I already went over all of that. So make sure your notes are in your backpack, and we'll see you tomorrow. And that is all that I have for you.